This property is for sale right now and it costs under 10 grand, less than a second-hand Toyota Corolla. At the same time, this house is on the market for over $10 million. So in this video, you're going to learn what 10 grand, 100 grand, all the way up to $10 million actually gets you in New Zealand. And along the way, we'll answer how much money you'd need to buy it, both as a homeowner and as a property investor. And most importantly, we're going to cover whether each one is actually worth owning, because some of these quietly cost you money no matter how much you spend. Let's start right at the bottom, around $10,000. Now, believe it or not, you can buy a studio in central Auckland for the price of a cheap used car, sometimes less. Take a studio apartment in the old Auckland Railway Station, the Grand Central Building. It's walking distance to Britomart and Spark Arena. Amazing location, yet studios in here have gone under the hammer for as little as a few $1,000s. So what's the catch? Well, it's leasehold. You don't own the land, you rent it forever through what's called ground rent. Now, if you add in body corporate plus council rates, one of these studios can cost you around $11,000 a year. And that's before maintenance, before you've fixed a single thing inside. There's no deposit conversation here though, because basically no bank will lend you money to buy this. You're gonna have to buy it with cash, effectively 100% deposit. So your 10 grand bargain, well, it's not really an investment, or at least not a good investment in my view. It's an $11,000 a year, $200 a week subscription. Now let's look at what you could buy if you had 10 times the money. Here's what $100,000 gets you in New Zealand. Although the cheapest district, the cheapest area in the country, still has a median sale price of $295,000, you can still buy a house in New Zealand for much, much less. I mean, one home buyer bought this property for just $95,000. It's in a small mining town of Ojai, about an hour's drive to Invercargill. It's got 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom on a quarter-acre section. And this time, you actually own the land. But as you'd expect, the house still has problems. It was built in the 1920s, so it's over 100 years old now. The wiring, the plumbing and insulation, well, it might need to be upgraded if you're going to rent this out, maybe even if you're going to live in it too. And the local economy was built on coal mining, and the mines have been closing or scaling down for decades. So what does it take to get into this tier? Well, to run the numbers, I built a model to mimic how the banks decide whether to give you a mortgage or not. And I'll put the assumptions on the screen now for all of you numbers nerds. But if you're buying it to live in it yourself, you need a 20% deposit. So that's 20 grand. And because the mortgage is so small, 80K in this case, you'd only need an income of about 60K to get that mortgage approved. As an investor, you'd have to put down a 30% deposit, so 30 grand in this case, which you have to have in cash, or you can borrow it against the equity you've already got in your own home if you already have one. So if you're the average family with the average house and the average mortgage, you'd need about $95,000 of household income to buy that 100K property as an investment. But when it comes to whether this is actually a good investment or not, I kind of look at this a bit like a Ford Falcon at a country option. It's cheap to acquire. It's going to be expensive to maintain, and nobody's really competing with you to buy it when you are purchasing it. That's why it's cheap. So you might struggle to get a buyer when you want out as well. So when it comes to this investment, in my view, cheap isn't always good. Good isn't always cheap. Could you make money here? Possibly. I mean, this same property I just showed you, that sold for about $44,000 in 2019. So it literally more than doubled in value over the last 7 years. But I see that as catch-up growth in a depressed market. But could you replicate that? Well, it's hard to say. But do me a quick favor. If this is useful so far, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. That's how I know which videos to do more of. But let's say you step up. What does $500,000 get you in New Zealand? Well, this is where many Kiwis actually start their property and investment journey. Sure, it's less than the median house price in the country, but if the median house price in New Zealand's $770,000, that means half the houses in the country sell for more than that, and half sell for less than that, right? So there's quite a lot of properties that are cheaper. Now, it's right around the median house price in Invercargill. I think it's about $540K through the last data. But even in a place like Christchurch, you might get a tidy townhouse that many entry-level investors I see start with. Now, if you are buying this to live in, on a new build, call it around $525K, you put down a 20% deposit, that's $105,000. If you're buying it to live in, you'd need a household income of around $95,000 to get that mortgage. Now, I know my company focuses on new builds, but I'm going to stick with that for this example because this is where the maths change and it's quite interesting. So if you buy a brand new house as an investment, you're basically like a homeowner. You only need a 20% deposit, not a larger 30% deposit like you usually would in our first example. So with this $525K house, you'd need a $105,000 deposit to buy it as an investment property. Compared to if you were to pay the same amount of money for an existing property, you'd need about $157,000 deposit. What's that? An extra 52 grand. So you can have the same priced house, but need different amounts of money in order to purchase it. Now, if you're buying this as an investment and you already own a house, you might be able to borrow the deposit like I talk about in this video. But let's say you had the cash and had exactly the same situation as before. In this case, you'd need a household income of around $120,000 to buy it. Now, is it a good investment? In my view, yeah, I like it. This is the tier where the math starts to work. In a mid-yield region of 525K, players might rent for around $500 to $540 a week. That's a gross yield of 5 to 5.3%. The rent's likely covering the mortgage. It might not be the perfect property, but it's a genuine first rung on the ladder, whether you're buying it to live in or as your first rental. And that's part of why it often works as an investment. Properties at this price are affordable for the people who actually want to live in them. So there's demand, which supports both the rent and the value. And I've bought plenty of properties around this price point myself. Now we get to the number everyone fixates on, $1 million, around Auckland's median house price. But here's the twist. $1 million in Auckland gets you something completely different from $1 million in Christchurch or in Invercargill. It's the same money in the same country, but it feels like three completely different worlds. In Auckland, $1 million, it might get you a modest townhouse on the North Shore, maybe a 4-bedroom family home in Manurewa or Papakura. In Herne Bay, you're talking about a small flat, but take the same money down to Christchurch and $1 million gets you a house that's well above average, a new 4-bedroom home in Horswell, maybe a double garage house in Northwood, and in Invercargill, $1 million. Wow, that's a house that's twice as expensive almost as the average property. So big property, big section. If you're buying it to live in, you'd put down a 20% deposit, that's $200K, and you'd need a household income of around $150K to afford that mortgage. As an investor, if we're talking about a standard 30% deposit, $1 million property, you need a $300K deposit. So for the average Kiwi family to afford that, once we count for the rental income, they'd also need a household income of around $150K to buy that as an investment property. Is it a good investment? Well, here's where it really matters. If you buy a $1 million property and it doubles in value over, call it 15 years, you make $1 million because it doubled in value. That is about a 4.8% return on that property. If you took that same $300,000 that you were going to put into the investment property over the same period to make that same $1 million from your $300K, you'd need to get a compounding return of 10.3%. Of course, there's a bit extra to think about with property in terms of cash flow and risk, but I give you that example just to show you the impact that having a mortgage can have when it comes to investing. Now, ultimately, we make our own decisions each about what to invest in though. But what if you have a few extra zeros and can afford $10 million? At this level, you've left the normal property market. You're at a completely different level. I mean, imagine a normal Tuesday. You wake up, your bedroom faces the harbour, Rangitoto's right there, the sheer curtains wave in the breeze as the pink morning light filters through your upstairs bedroom. You're so close to the sea you can hear the tides and the waves lapping the sand. You make coffee in a kitchen that an interior designer, they would have spent like 6 months planning. You walk out to your infinity edge pool, the water seems to spill straight into Takapuna Beach. By 8 a.m, you're walking out your private beach gate, through your own boat shed and onto the sand. Your office is just 3 minutes up the road, no neighbours close enough to bother you, just you, the water, and a view that people fly across the world to photograph. That is the reality if you've got $10 million to drop on a house. 4 bedrooms, 3 marble bathrooms, a wine cellar, a 3-car garage right on the beachfront. To even be in this market, you'd need to be close to being in the country's top 1%. That means being worth more than about $8.7 million. Now, if you were buying this as your home, put down that 20% deposit, we're talking $2 million. And to get the mortgage approved, because we're talking about an $8 million mortgage here, you'd need an income of about $1.4 million per year. That is more than some people earn in their entire lifetime. Now, if you were buying this as an investment, it gets worse. You'd need a $3 million deposit, an extra $1 million, and that average Kiwi couple who we've been running the numbers for, they would now need a household income closer to $1.12 million to purchase this. Why is it lower than a homeowner? It's because you get some rental income as well. Now, in reality, almost nobody borrows $8 million or $7 million to go buy a house like this, right? Typically, you take out a lower mortgage and you've got a bigger deposit just because those mortgages are so large. But is a $10 million house a good investment? In my view, no. Ultra luxury homes get pitiful gross yields, often just 1% to 2%, whereas the average in New Zealand is closer to 4.5%. So you don't buy these types of properties to rent out. But if you're super wealthy, you might buy one of these as a home, live in it. Then if you have to move overseas for work for a while, you rent it out, which is why sometimes you see really expensive houses actually for rent on Trade Me. The other thing you've got to factor in is eventually you might want to sell this property, and it can take 18 months to 2 years to sell some of these properties just because the buyer pool is so small. So what should you do with $10 million if you've got it? Well, if you're buying at this level as an investment, you've usually got some options. You might put that money into commercial property instead, or diversify into something else entirely, i.e. not property, right? I often see Kiwis use property as a wealth builder, largely because you can borrow against it, buy an expensive house, and if it goes up in value, you can potentially make a lot of money. But if you've got a $3 million deposit sitting there, the truth is, you're basically already wealthy. At this point, it's less about building even more wealth and more about how you use it to live a good retirement. And if you're in the phase where you want to use property as a wealth builder, that's where my team at Opus Partners can help. You book a free portfolio planning session with one of our financial advisors, and after an hour, you walk away with a 19-page wealth plan that outlines what you'll buy, when, and how much your portfolio could be worth in the future. The link's in the description to book a free session. So that is all 5 tiers. 10 grand buys you a leasehold studio that quietly bleeds you. 100 grand buys a real house in a town that no one's ever heard of. $500,000, that's where the maths finally starts to work, and $1 million buys 3 completely different worlds. 10 million, that buys the best lifestyle in the country and one of its worst investments. And if you're thinking about investing, you need to know that while most of the country's property prices are dead flat, house prices are crashing in these areas and booming in these ones, which is exactly what we cover in the next video. Click the video on your screen and I'll see you in there.